on May the 8th, there is going to be a government in power which is going to be doing what the IMF and the European Bank insist that it does. And that's going to mean more austerity, more attacks on us, more privatisation of the NHS, more academies coming into education. All of that is there. And the only way that's going to be defeated is if people turn around and say, no, we're not going to accept this. And I just want to sort of like play on the age thing a bit, because I can remember in 1974 Ted Heath coming into government, and I think a lot of people in the room won't actually have that memory of Ted Heath. It's worth looking about his government, because Ted Heath was Margaret Thatcher before Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister. Ted Heath was elected on the basis of saying that he wasn't going to keep putting money into British industry in the way that Wilson's government had done beforehand. Ted Heath said there would be no lame ducks under this government. He brought in very vicious anti-union legislation. It was a real vicious attack on the working class movement, and it was resisted. You know, people might have heard of the Pentonville Dockers, people who were locked up for actually taking action against their employers when the docks were being privatised, and they were released because people demonstrated, threatened to come out on strike, and they created this title of someone called the official solicitor, who suddenly appeared on the scene and got them out of prison after it had been said that they couldn't come out. We saw the first miners' strike in 1972 in the post-war period, which led to a fantastic improvement in the wages and conditions of miners. And then in 1974, the second miners' strike, which led to Ted Heath, in a period of a 3-day week, Ted Heath saying, I'm going to call an election, and the question is, who rules this country? Is it the government or is it the miners? And Ted Heath lost that election. What that showed is that no matter how vicious the attack against our class, if our class is prepared to stand up and fight back, we can beat the most vicious, rotten people in government, no matter how well they organise. We've got the strength. We need to keep shouting it out loud and proud. And I'm convinced that if we do that, then in the period of the next government, we will start to see the upsurge, and perhaps we'll be celebrating our version of the Arab Spring, where people come out and actually say, we're going to bring a government down if it won't do what we want, and we're going to make sure we get something that benefits us all.
I totally agree with that. I mean, we all know that whatever the result of the election, whatever the result, we still face years of austerity to come. We all know that even if we were in a situation where we had an anti-austerity government like they did in Greece, like they did elect Syriza in Greece, yet they have now made some concessions in Greece. They've been forced to make some concessions. But even if we were in that situation, we'd still need strikes, we'd still need demonstrations, we'd still need activity. Wherever the government comes in power, we have to keep the pressure on in terms of what we all need to see. We all know that it's not the governments that pull the strings behind the scenes. But in terms of this other situation that we face ourselves at the moment, I think we've seen over the past, since the defeat of the miners, I suppose, traditional trade union struggle has been low. We've gone through a kind of, in terms of strike action, in terms of trade union membership, has been on the decline over the last few years. However, what I think we have seen is an increase in the level of political radicalisation that's happening across the country. I think we've seen much more demonstrations, we've seen much more of these kinds of things. So I think it's our responsibility to rebuild the trade union movement. It's our responsibility to rebuild those kind of traditions, because our strongest weapon that we have is our ability to withdraw our labour. That is the strongest weapon that we have. So I think going forwards, we need to see the demonstrations, the movements, all of these kind of things as a way of building confidence to take further action in the workplace. That's what we need to be doing. That's why the trade unions need to remain at the heart of the People's Assembly and of the anti-austerity movement. But that's also why the People's Assembly, just 6 weeks after the election, is going to be calling a national demonstration. We're going to be assembling that demonstration in the heart of the city, outside the Bank of England, and marching to one of the poorest areas in London, one of the poorest boroughs in the country actually, Tower Hamlets, which is right next door to the City of London. I think it's everybody's duty here today to make sure that that demonstration is the biggest possible demonstration that it can be. That can send a very, very clear message to whatever government gets in power that the anti-austerity movement is not going away, it's only getting bigger, and we will continue to be a thorn in the side to any government that remains committed to austerity. And we're going to be putting on coaches from all across the country. There's coaches going down from York here. I think there's going to be a collection at the door, because we don't want a single person to miss that demonstration because they can't afford to get down to it. So please, on your way out, drop as much money as you can in the bucket, and all of that money will go towards bringing people down who can't afford to get down there, to giving them free places on the coaches. And between now and the 20th of June, go back to your trade union branches, go back to your workplaces, your workmates, make sure your family, your friends, everybody that possibly can comes on that demonstration, because I think we can get hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets. We'll create a pole of attraction in society when all you hear from the mainstream is the politics of austerity, and we'll send a very clear message that we'll no longer accept this and that we demand the alternative. So please do that, and see you on the 20th of June.
Sam, I feel almost as weepy as when I was watching Pride. When I withdraw my Labour, I don't think anybody notices. I was off work for 3 months once, and I was surprised how many people didn't seem to know at all. But we don't all do the same kind of work. So we can all do different things. You know, what I do a lot is comparative research, looking at how this country is doing in comparison to others, bringing people's attention to that, trying to understand the processes by which inequality damages society. I write about it in different forums. Owen writes in different places. Mark is very funny, gets people to listen, gets them engaged. I'm amazed by what you've done in Barnsley. Sam, you're organising us all to, go down on buses, but we can all do different things. So some of us, it will be activism and campaigning. And for some of us, it will be stuffing leaflets in envelopes and knocking on people's doors. And for others, it will be talking to our employers and trying to get them to pay the living wage. Or it will be signing petitions. It will be whether we choose to vote or not. But we all have different things to do. But I think one of the most important things that all of us can do is to treat one another with kindness and respect, and expect everyone else in society to behave in that way as well. That we all value each other, and we expect everybody else to value us too, and that we expect that before we give them our respect. And that we all, we join hands and we stay in this together, properly in this together.
Clearly, the person that put the question does believe that we need strikes and protests after the election, because I suppose there's one of maybe three possibilities after the election. One is that the Labour Party sort of reverts back to being as Tony Blair was. My old friend Linda Smith, who is sadly not around with us anymore, I remember before the Iraq War, about 2002, a comment about Tony Blair. She said, before Tony Blair got in, I had no illusions in him whatsoever, no expectations in the slightest, not one. And even I'm disappointed. I don't think that will happen necessarily, but if that does, then obviously strikes and protests will be necessary to change things. On the other hand, supposing Ed Miliband's government turned out to be extraordinarily radical and it was some sort of Hugo Chavez type situation, even more unlikely, I would grant it. But even if it did, then that would not mean strikes and protests wouldn't have to happen, because then the people in power would do all they possibly could to stop them being able to carry those things out. If it's some sort of mixture anywhere between those two, then obviously strikes and protests will be needed as well, because the people who run society are the people who own and control the way we produce things, the people who control the banks and the insurance companies, the finance and the factories around the world and so on. These people own and control that stuff, and they want to carry on owning and controlling it, and in such a way that they make the maximum possible profit. And if there is any laws that are brought about or any change that means that that is reduced and that their ability to make maximum profit is thwarted in any way, they will do all they can to make sure that it goes back to how it was. So for those reasons, whoever wins the election, that will be the case. But far from meaning that that is hopeless, and far from even meaning that we sort of, well, then we need to start a movement or something, even what we have now has changed things, because it is part of the picture. Part of the global picture is that there is protest, that there is, in all sorts of hidden ways in which they cannot get their way. They haven't won the argument. If anybody now, the majority of people believe in this country believe that the railways should be renationalised, for example. The energy companies are hated, which means that Ed Miliband is able to sound reasonably militant on these issues. That is because of all the meetings like this. It doesn't happen automatically. If people have just sat and done nothing, it's all the different, even if it's writing a letter to the paper, whatever complaint the form comes in, then those things have made a difference. So just one example that I think I'll finish on is that if people think nothing can make a difference, just the example of gay marriage. Now, the Labour Party, for example, will generally say you can't really win anything unless you win over the middle ground, and that's often an excuse for agreeing with Nigel Farage or whatever. And it's true you have to win over the middle ground, but it doesn't just have to be by agreeing with them. You can win them over. 20 years ago, if you were in favour of gay marriage, you were an extremist. If any politician had suggested that they supported gay marriage, I think Ken Livingstone did, I'm not even sure he went that far, he was pilloried as an absolute idiot. And now you're an extremist if you're against it. And that hasn't happened. No, they just sound extraordinary. I love the one that, you know, there is still, what's his name? I don't remember, there's one of them who still says it undermines my marriage between me and my wife once two men can get married, which makes me think she must have the most fragile marriage you've ever. You see this, two people we've never heard of and don't care about are getting married. Really? Well, pack your bags and fuck off. Crazy as they are, and that has happened because of all the meetings, of the campaigns, the things like this where people have raised it, they've won people round. You might not think you're doing anything different, but you're talking to your neighbour, the person at work, your own family, whatever, and winning them round. And all of this that we're here tonight of is part of this huge, massive campaign that may not be as dramatic and as exciting as the one that, you know, certainly was exciting if you were part of it, that George was talking about there, of the Dockers in the 1970s. But nonetheless, it is part of a massive campaign to say that the human race is about a lot more than profit. And it's about that campaign saying that we can produce a better world than the one that they've got. And even as it is now, that is making a difference.
So I've been very rude to keep occasionally looking at my phone to check out how the leaders' debate's going. It's going very well. It's going about 23 minutes in, a black hole appeared and has sucked in Nigel Farage and Derek Cameron. So we won. Who didn't just get rid of the poll tax, but booted Margaret Thatcher out of number 10 to boot as well. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Everything we have, all those rights and all those gains won by people in this room, by your mothers, your fathers, your grandmothers, your grandfathers, your ancestors before that. And it is not for us to allow many of the things that our ancestors fought for at such cost and at such sacrifice to be stripped away by a government which didn't even win the last general election. It's up to all of us to do that. We've got to keep that tradition alive. We've got to have the courage and the determination and the hope that our ancestors showed. They were up against what seemed like completely insurmountable odds that were far more insurmountable than those that confront all of us today. We live in a society which is rigged in favour of the mean and the greedy at the top, tax dodgers, bankers, poverty-paying bosses, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's up to all of us to change that. We can build a society run in favour of the real wealth creators, working people, the people who keep this country ticking day after day by hand or by brain. But it's up to all of us to have that same courage and that same determination and that same hope. And as our ancestors overcame, we too will overcome as well. Nelson Mandela said, "It seems impossible until it is done." Well, we've got to keep the torch burning bright. Whoever is in government, we will fight for a different sort of society. And if we have that same courage, if we have that same determination and we have that same hope, then we will win. If we stand together, we fight together, then we will win every single battle together.
Thank you.
We want to thank
And to you.